After the intolerable acts were created by the British government, there was a big backlash of these acts from the colonists. Not only patriots, but many neutralists saw this as a specific attack on a city in the colonies, and they did not like that. So many colonists claimed that they would rather abandon their city to flames before paying a penny for the lost tea that the intolerable acts forced Boston to repay all of that tea. Other colonies kind of grouped together and were on Massachusetts' side, as they claimed an attack made on one of our sister colonies is an attack made on British America. Still, this is a patriot point of view, but still we need to remember that there were many loyalists in the colonies who had thought Boston had gone way too far and should actually pay for this tea. They kind of saw them as kind of outcasts and, hey, you guys aren't doing the right thing. You need to repay the British government because they do a lot for us. Anyways, in September of 1774, 50 leaders from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia. This was called the First Continental Congress. And this was essentially in order to kind of talk about the whole situation that was going on and make almost a team decision. This is the first time you are seeing all the colonies and delegates from each colony come together to talk as one. This here is an image of the First Continental Congress in 1774. So, anyways, these delegates ranged in opinion from very, very strong patriots to neutralists and even loyalists as well. So there were many members represented within this First Continental Congress, and it wasn't just patriots. George Washington was actually one of these delegates, and he was a neutralist during this time. Only one thing truly united all of these members, and it was their love for liberty and a hatred for tyranny. They did not like when governments started bullying their citizens. So they all agreed upon sending a message to King George. In this message, they urged the king to consider their complaints and the intolerable acts as a whole. They also called on all of the colonies to boycott the British goods until Parliament repealed the intolerable acts. After this meeting, King George refused to answer their message and did not even respond. King George is also stated as saying, "Blows must be decided whether they are to be subject to this country or independent." That means that he was essentially fed up with the colonists and their complaints and said that this was going to come down to a fight, essentially. So, it came down to a fight. And this started in April of 1775, in which a British spy told General Gage, who was a British commander in the colonies, as we know that there was many British troops in the colonies, that colonists were hiding a large supply of gunpowder and weapons. The colonists had actually started to form a militia, and this was very ununified and really truly unorganized militia at this time, but it consisted of patriots who kind of saw this coming and wanted to protect themselves, so they had started gathering ammunition and gunpowder. And a spy told General Gage about this. Gage knew that he had to act upon this. Therefore, he ordered 700 troops to seize these weapons from Concord. Patriot spies were also out that night, and they saw that the British troops were moving to Concord, and they knew that Concord was the area where they had their supplies and weapons. Therefore, they knew that they needed to act as well when they saw these troops coming. This is where you may have heard of the famous Paul Revere running through the streets saying, "The Redcoats are coming, the Redcoats are coming." This was actually a myth that many historians have concluded, but still, these spies were awareing the colonists and the militia that British troops were coming. This is the image that many people see of kind of these colonist spies warning the small towns and communities that the British were coming to Concord. So as you can see, this is a route that was taken by the British troops. Here in the red, They're in Boston here, and they are moving to Concord. So they are following this route out of Boston in red to Concord, and they were going to gather the weapons and return. Okay, right here in blue, this is essentially Revere's route. He had heard about this from the spies, and he is going around and he is telling the people in these towns that the British are coming, and he's actually going to move along a little ahead of the British troops here. Once word got out, a small group of Minutemen, which means that men that were essentially ready to fight in a minute, and this was the kind of the militia at this time for the colonies, and these Minutemen met British troops at Lexington. If we go back to here, we can see that Lexington is about halfway between Concord and Boston. Okay, so they met the troops at Lexington, and they actually were instructed to don't fire unless fired upon. And they were waiting for the British to come there. All of a sudden, they met the British, and there was obviously immediate tension. Still, nobody knows who shot, but a shot rang out. Minutemen fired back and forth with the British. They heard this shot, obviously men with guns, and they're going to start firing into a frenzy. In the end of this firing battle, 8 colonists lay dead, and many others are wounded. The British essentially won this small firefight and started moving on to Concord. Even though this illustration here is during the day, you can see that this may be a scene that was replicated at the Battle of Lexington here, with the British troops firing upon the Minutemen, and the Minutemen laying dead, but still holding brave and holding true to their territory. Even with the Minutemen firing upon the British troops, the British made it to Concord, and they started searching for the weapons and gunpowder that they had originally wanted to seize. They actually started setting fire to the town. They were building up a bunch of kind of fire pits, a bunch of wooded furniture and pieces of houses, and they were making kind of these big fire pits as well. And the Minutemen around the town saw this, and they organized together, and they actually crossed a bridge, and they started setting fire to the British troops. Now, even though the Minutemen's leader was shot and killed, the Minutemen stood their ground and fired hard for 2 full minutes on these British troops that were in the town of Concord. This hard fire sent the British running, and they had to retreat back to Boston, a very long route on foot. On the way back from Boston, word had gotten out, and there was 4,000 Minutemen on their retreat route. They shot every redcoat that they saw. In total, about 74 British soldiers were dead, and 200 were wounded, out of the original 700 that came to Concord that night. As for the colonists, there was about 49 colonists dead and 41 that were wounded. But essentially, the Minutemen and the colonists had won the Concord battle and pushed the British troops from seizing their weapons. This is an illustration of the Minutemen that were crossing the bridge and firing upon the British troops that were in Concord, about to set fire to the town and seize the weapons and the gunpowder. Overall, Lexington and Concord told us many things. It first told us that the British had greatly underestimated the fight and the power that the colonists had. They did not realize that they were disorganized and that they had militia and Minutemen ready at a moment's notice. Lexington and Concord started the fighting that would eventually lead to American independence. This proved that the Americans and the colonists were willing to fight for their rights and willing to die as well.